wildfire took everything from her. Her cubs, her purpose, her voice. Savannah, once the fiercest lioness in the sanctuary, wandered the scorched forest in silence, milk still dripping from a body that had no one left to feed. Then, one morning, she found a stranger, a lion cub, not hers, abandoned and dying in the ashes by every law of nature. She should have walked away or ended his life, but instead, she opened her mouth and carried him home. This is not a story about instinct. This is a story about a miracle born from grief. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Autumn in Aspen Ridge was not supposed to feel like this. The winds that usually whispered between the pine trees now carried the lingering scent of smoke and ash. A wildfire, the worst in over 2 decades, had torn through the southern edge of the Colorado Wildlife Sanctuary just 3 weeks prior. Charred tree trunks stood like the skeletal remains of giants, and the forest floor, once soft with moss and needles, crunched beneath every paw and boot with brittle death. The sky above the Rocky Mountains was unusually clear, a pale blue canvas too pure for the devastation below. Dry air hung heavy over the ridge, and the cold of early morning bit harder than usual, stillness broken only by the occasional call of a raven circling overhead. Savannah, a 7-year-old lioness, moved silently between the shadows of scorched pine trunks. Her coat, once the color of warm honey, was now streaked with soot and dull with grief. She was tall and powerfully built, with the sleek, muscular grace of a cat born in the wild, though her first years had been anything but raised in captivity. Savannah had spent most of her early life performing tricks under bright lights in a traveling circus. Years of confinement had not broken her, but they had carved a wariness into her soul. She had been rescued at the age of 4 and brought to Aspen Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary, an attempt at rewilding that had, against odds, succeeded for a time. She'd thrived in the sanctuary's open ranges and dense woods. She'd even formed a small pride with 2 other rescued females, and this past spring, she'd given birth to 3 cubs. They were her miracle, and the fire took them all. The den had been at the base of a ridge, near a stream that dried in late summer. The flames moved faster than any animal could run. Savannah had been away only for an hour, following a scent trail of mule deer, when she returned. Smoke filled the air, and the entrance to the den had collapsed under burning branches. She had clawed until her paws bled. Then she stopped. Since then, Savannah had not left the trees. Her body, despite everything, still produced milk. The loss did not stop the hormonal tide, and with each passing day, her restlessness grew. She didn't hunt, she barely drank. She wandered and waited for something she could not name, miles away, on the eastern slope of Aspen Ridge. Another story unfolded. Leo was 3 months old. His fur was a soft beige gold, almost silver in the early morning light. His frame small for his age, but full of wild energy until recently. Born to a wild pride in the northern territories of the sanctuary, his days had been spent between play and the warmth of his mother's side, until the poachers came. No one in the sanctuary spotted them in time. A team of illegal hunters, well-armed and efficient, breached the northern fencing and took down several animals before vanishing into the night. Among the victims, Leo's mother. The pride scattered in panic in the confusion. Leo, still too young to run far, hid beneath a low bush, trembling, heart pounding like a trapped bird. When the sun rose the next day, The world had changed. The scent of blood filled the air, and the familiar warmth of his pride was gone. Leo wandered, calling for his mother. No one answered. For 3 days he survived on puddles and instinct. By the 4th, his legs began to fail him, his ribs pressed against his thin fur, and his tail dragged like a thread behind him. On the 5th morning, he collapsed beneath a pine, hidden in the shadow of a fallen log, too weak to cry. That was when Savannah found him. The lioness had been following a trail with no real purpose. Something in her pulled her toward the eastern valley that morning, a direction she had never taken before. Perhaps it was the wind, or the silence, or some primal whisper in her blood. She spotted him curled beneath the log, nothing but a trembling bundle of fur and bones. At first, her muscles tensed with old instincts. Lionesses do not nurture strange cubs, especially not those outside their bloodline. More often, they kill them in the wild. Survival favors your own. But as Savannah approached, something inside her broke open. Leo lifted his head, eyes glazed, not with fear, but surrender. His gaze locked with hers, deep golden orbs barely able to focus. Savannah stood still. Then, her body moved without her mind. She leaned down and sniffed him. He smelled of ash and sap, not death. She licked the side of his face, slow and coarse. Leo whimpered faintly, but didn't resist. Savannah's mouth opened, not to bite, but to grasp the nape of his neck. Carefully, as if he were her own, she turned and carried him into the forest, her paws silent over scorched ground. The sun rose pale and slow over Aspen Ridge, casting long golden beams through the thinning forest canopy. It was colder than usual for late October. The smoke from the wildfire had long settled, but its ghost still lingered, clinging to the bark, to the soil, to the air itself. Savannah stirred in a nest of pine needles and scattered branches, her breath visible in the morning chill. Beside her, Leo lay curled tightly, still weak but alive. Savannah's body, once hardened by years of captivity and fire-forged grief, had softened in the days since finding him. She watched the cub sleep, his sides rising with each fragile breath. She had fed him through the night, guiding his mouth to her belly where milk still flowed, despite the ache in her heart. Each time he nursed, a strange calm overtook her. Not peace, but purpose. When Leo cried, she licked his face gently when he trembled in the cold. She pulled him closer with her foreleg, cradling him like one of her own. It didn't make sense. He was not hers, not by blood, not by birth, but nature, as it often does, had rewritten its rules. Miles away, a different kind of watching was happening. Nina Carter crouched by a shallow stream bed, her gloved fingers brushing the edge of a paw print pressed into damp soil. She was in her early 30s, her tall frame dressed in olive ranger gear, dark curls pinned beneath a khaki cap. Years in Yellowstone. Tracking wolves had sharpened her senses, and she needed all of them now. "She's been here," she murmured, behind her. Wade Benson approached with quiet steps. He was in his 40s, sturdy and tall, with sun-weathered skin and a face carved by long days and short tempers. A silver chain peeked from under his collar, a wedding ring strung through it. He didn't talk about his wife, and no one asked. Fresh, he asked last night, Nina said. And smaller tracks alongside hers, definitely a cub. Wade narrowed his eyes. "Leo, there's no other explanation." He exhaled slowly, as if the truth tasted bitter. Why would she take him? She lost her own. Nina rose to her feet. Exactly. Maybe that's why she took him. Wade remained silent, but the line of his jaw grew tight. They had rescued Savannah from a circus 3 years ago, watched her adjust to the wild with cautious optimism. After the fire took her cubs, she vanished into the burned zone. No one expected her to survive the loss, let alone take in another's child. "I'll set up the cameras," Nina said. "We need to see this ourselves." That night, back at the sanctuary's ranger housing, Tyler Benson couldn't sleep at 11. He was a boy caught between two silences, the silence after his mother's voice had faded forever, and the silence that hung between him and his father ever since. He sat upright in bed, knees hugged to his chest, staring at the window where the forest loomed beyond the glass. Tyler had never met Leo. The cub had been born in the wild, far from the enclosures near the sanctuary. But ever since the fire, ever since the whispers about a missing lion cub, Tyler had begun to dream. In the dreams, he was walking through pine trees, not the trails he knew, but older ones, dream trails, soft with mist, and always, somewhere in that dream forest, he would hear a sound, a soft cry, not quite human, not quite animal, a whimper, then a rumble, then the sight of fur, pale gold and trembling. He never saw its face, but he always knew its name. Leo. He had stopped telling his dad about the dreams after the third time. Wade would only say it was grief speaking, or memory, but Tyler knew better. These weren't memories. They were something deeper. A knowing. A calling, somewhere out there. Leo was alive, and waiting. In the forest. Savannah watched as Leo struggled to stand. He had grown stronger. Though his legs still wobbled like saplings in the wind, he attempted to mimic her gait as she walked toward a clearing where deer scent lingered in the air. It was time to teach him. She didn't expect him to hunt yet, but he needed to understand movement, how to crouch low, how to listen before leaping. He watched her every motion, eyes wide with curiosity when she pounced on a patch of moss. He followed clumsily, tumbling forward but rising again, undeterred. Later, she brought down a young rabbit. Instead of eating it whole, she tore it into small pieces, nudging them toward him. Leo hesitated. His instincts told him it was meat, but the texture was unfamiliar. Still, hunger won. He bit, chewed, swallowed. Savannah watched with something close to pride. High above, hidden in the branches of a scorched pine. A trail camera clicked silently. The next day, Nina reviewed the footage in the ranger cabin. She said nothing as Wade entered, just hit play. The screen showed Savannah lying with the cub, licking his ears. Then, a moment later, she was feeding him, nudging meat gently toward his muzzle. Wade stared, his brow furrowed. "She's not keeping him like prey," Nina said. "She's raising him." Wade nodded slowly, but the tension never left his shoulders. "That's not her cub. We can't forget that." "No," Nina said softly, but she hasn't forgotten either. That night, as frost settled over Aspen Ridge and stars pierced the dark. Savannah curled once more around Leo. His breathing had steadied. He no longer whimpered in his sleep. And in the moment before, she drifted into darkness. She licked the top of his head and felt, not grief, not longing, but a quiet, dangerous hope. The days grew shorter in Aspen Ridge, and the morning air clung to the trees with frost. Mist drifted low across the forest floor, weaving between scorched stumps and new shoots of grass sprouting defiantly from ash. The burn zone, once silent and haunted, now trembled with cautious life. And in the heart of it all, a lioness and her adopted cub moved like ghosts reborn. Savannah had become a teacher each day. She led Leo through the forest's ever-shifting lessons, She showed him how to step lightly even when the ground was cracked and dry, how to freeze when the wind changed direction, how to listen not just with ears but with the whole body. She crouched low behind thick roots, waited, then leapt forward in silence. Leo watched her with wide, amber eyes and then, clumsily but determined, tried to do the same. He wasn't graceful. His paws were still too large for his growing body, but he learned quickly. She brought him to a rocky hilltop that overlooked a shallow glen, where mule deer often passed at dawn. Savannah would place Leo behind a boulder, then circle downwind, showing him how patience hunted better than hunger. When the prey came, she would strike, and afterward, she would let him feed first. But Leo wasn't like her, where Savannah's movements were born from necessity and hardened instinct. Leo's were gentler, more curious. He sniffed butterflies that flitted too close. He paused to watch squirrels dart up trees. When they passed a dead elk carcass, instead of eating, he nuzzled it as if in mourning. Savannah didn't try to change him, she only observed, her sharp gaze softening as the cub slowly reshaped the edges of her grief. Some nights, when the sky blazed with stars and the wind quieted, she would hear him try to roar. It came out as a squeaky rasp at first, more like a mule than a threat. But he kept trying. Savannah would answer with a low, steady rumble, not to teach, but to comfort, to tell him, "I hear you, I'm here, miles away, beneath the warm glow of ranger cabin lights." Another storm was building, one not made of wind or fire, but fear. Wade Benson stood before a dry erase map in the sanctuary's operations room. His arms were folded, jaw tight, eyes locked on the red X marking the latest trail cam footage location. "She's staying in the burn zone," Nina said quietly, leaning against the desk behind him, too close to the northern fences. Wade replied, "If she gets spooked and crosses into the grazing lands, she won't." Nina said, "Not with the cub, she's anchored." Wade shook his head. "She's unpredictable, and she's raising a cub that doesn't belong to her. What happens if instinct flips back the other way?" Across the room sat David Harlow, the sanctuary's head of animal behavior research, in his late 50s. David was soft-spoken and round-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and thin spectacles that constantly slid down his nose. He had spent 3 decades observing big cat behavior and carried a calm that often clashed with Wade's urgency. "She's not unstable," David said. "She's maternal. There's a difference. She's wild." Wade shot back, "And we can't risk her lashing out." "Then don't provoke her," Nina said quietly. But Wade had already made up his mind. "We track her. We contain her if we have to. We bring Leo back." That evening, Wade sat Tyler down at the dinner table. It had been months since the two had shared a meal. Tyler barely touched his food, picking at the mashed potatoes without lifting his eyes. His father spoke slowly, the way someone might approach a wild animal. "We're planning to recover the cub," he said. Tyler froze. "What does that mean?" the boy asked, voice flat. Wade hesitated. "It means bringing him back here. Where he's safe, you mean taking him away?" Tyler said, his fingers tightening on the fork. "From a lioness. Ty, a fully grown one. We don't know how stable she is." Tyler looked up then, and his voice cracked, not with anger, but with something deeper. "Why now? Why didn't you go after him before? When he first went missing?" Wade's face darkened. "Because we didn't know she had him. We didn't know he was alive." "But I did," Tyler said. Wade blinked. "What I saw him, not with my eyes, with something else, I dreamed him. Every night, I saw him hiding in the trees. I heard him cry, and I knew he wasn't gone. Wade's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Tyler stood up, trembling. And now you want to take him from the only thing that's keeping him alive. You want to cage him, just like you cage your own feelings, like you caged Mom's memory. Wade's hands curled into fists on the table, but he didn't speak. Tyler's voice broke entirely. You already lost her. Dad, don't make me lose him too. He ran to his room and slammed the door. Wade sat alone, staring at the cold food. Outside, the wind picked up, the branches creaked. Something deep inside him, a place he thought was sealed, shifted. Back in the forest, Savannah and Leo rested in the hollow of a tree trunk. The cub had curled into her belly, his body warm, his heartbeat steady. She looked up toward the night sky, toward a silver crescent moon peeking through the clouds. Her ears flicked. Her eyes stayed open, and for the first time since the fire, she let out a low, steady purr. Not for comfort, but for peace. The wind was restless that morning, carrying the scent of dry pine and something older, wilder. It swept through the canyons of Aspen Ridge, curling into every hollow and crag, stirring the long grasses like a warning whispered in an ancient tongue. Savannah raised her head, nostrils flaring, her muscles stiffened. She could feel it. Something had changed. Leo lay nearby, pawing at a half-eaten rabbit carcass, the bones already picked clean of meat. His golden fur had thickened slightly, muscles beginning to form beneath his growing frame. At nearly 5 months old, he was still a cub, but no longer helpless. His curiosity had deepened into quiet awareness. He watched his surroundings more closely now, mimicking Savannah's stillness before each movement, each sound. Yet he remained gentle, his eyes soft with wonder even in the presence of death. Savannah rose and scanned the wind. It was not the scent of prey that unsettled her, it was something else, something male. The ridge behind them was steep and lined with jagged granite teeth, but beyond it lay a clearing, and in that clearing, a large figure stood watching. The lion's mane was thick and coarse, blackened along the edges like the bristles of a burned broom. His body was scarred, one eye slightly clouded with age, but his gait was heavy with dominance. He was a rogue male, possibly from the southern border, likely exiled long ago by a younger coalition. His name, unknown to Savannah, was Brutus. Brutus had wandered into Aspen Ridge weeks ago, driven by hunger and instinct. He had crossed paths with deer, foxes, and even humans. He avoided them all. But the trail of a lioness and cub had drawn him here. And in the wild, that only meant one thing: territory, challenge, blood. Savannah growled low in her throat, ears flattening. Brutus stepped forward from the shadows of the trees, making no attempt to hide. His gaze fell on Leo, and in that instant, Savannah understood. This was no curious traveler, this was a conqueror, and her cub, her Leo, was a threat to be removed. She leapt in front of Leo, tail lashing, shoulders tensed. Her roar split the silence, sharp and furious. Brutus responded with a guttural rumble and surged forward. The fight was swift and brutal. Savannah struck first, swiping with a forepaw that slashed across Brutus's muzzle. He retaliated, ramming her side with his weight, claws tearing into her shoulder. Blood splattered onto the pine needles, dark and hot. But Savannah didn't retreat. She spun, clamped her jaws onto Brutus's neck, dragging him sideways with a growl born of both fear and fury. Behind her, Leo stood frozen until Savannah cried out, not a roar, a pained yelp. Leo's eyes widened, and then, as if summoned by instinct alone, he stepped forward and let out a sound that had never before left his throat. A roar. It cracked the air like thunder, rough and unpolished, but unmistakably lion. It rang with desperation and defiance, and it made Brutus pause, just for a second. Savannah seized the moment, hurling herself forward again with renewed strength. Her claws tore into Brutus's flank, forcing the older male to stumble back. The message had been sent. This cub was claimed, and the price of taking him would be high. Brutus backed away, blood dripping from his snout. He stared at Leo, confused, then turned and vanished into the trees. Savannah stood panting, sides heaving. Blood ran down her leg, but she remained upright. Leo approached her hesitantly and licked at the wound just below her rib cage. Savannah bent her head and touched her nose to his. Elsewhere in the sanctuary, Tyler Benson stood beside Nina Carter at the edge of the northern trail. He wore a heavy green jacket too big for his shoulders and carried a small pair of binoculars slung around his neck. His hair was windblown, and his boots were muddy, but his eyes, those eyes were alive. "Are you sure this is the right direction?" he asked. Nina, always calm, adjusted the GPS tracker strapped to her wrist. "Trail cam picked up her signal an hour ago. She's near Ridge 7. That's the burn line." Tyler's voice wavered. "If she's hurt, will she run?" "Not if she has the cub," Nina said softly. They moved quietly, weaving through the trees as they climbed the final slope. Nina signaled him to stop, through the brush. They saw it. A shallow den beneath a large pine, ringed with claw marks and blood-stained leaves. Tyler's heart pounded. Savannah lay curled in the den, her flank rising and falling slowly. Leo sat beside her, licking her wounds with slow, deliberate strokes. Tyler stepped forward before Nina could stop him. Leo looked up for a moment. Nothing moved. The wind paused, the world held its breath. Then Leo padded forward, carefully, cautiously. He didn't growl, didn't run. He simply stopped a few feet from the boy and looked into his eyes. Tyler's throat tightened. "I found you," he whispered, behind him. Nina kept her hand near her tranquilizer gun, but didn't draw it. Savannah lifted her head, watching, but she didn't move. Leo turned and walked back to her side, brushing his flank against hers. Tyler understood. This was no ordinary animal. This was no lost pet. He was part of something sacred now, something earned, and he wasn't lost anymore. The sun had not yet risen over Aspen Ridge when Savannah stirred. A soft wind rustled through the pine canopy, bending the branches ever so slightly as the forest stretched into the quiet before dawn. In the clearing near the edge of the ridge, where the trees grew thin and the earth sloped into gold grassland, Leo lay curled beside her, sleeping soundly. She watched him for a long time. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm she had come to know as well as her own heartbeat. His paws, once small and clumsy, now carried quiet strength. His body had filled out, and though he was still just a cub, the first signs of his future shimmered at the edge of every movement, the way he held his head, the way his shoulders had begun to broaden, even his voice, when he rumbled in play or frustration, hinted at the lion he would one day become, but that day would not come here. Savannah knew the boundary they had reached, the line between the wild that had nurtured him and the life that waited beyond. A lion could not live forever in the shadows of grief, not even one raised in love. She rose slowly and nudged him with her nose. Leo blinked awake, confused. He stood and followed as she led him through the trees, across old trails they had once hunted, past moss-covered rocks, and down into a wide valley where the air smelled of lion, Not her scent, but many. New, familiar, strange. They arrived just as the first light broke the horizon. In the open grass below them lay a pride, at least a dozen lions. Moving lazily in the early sun, 2 young males chased one another near a watering hole, while several lionesses lounged in the tall grass. Among them was an older female, large and broad-shouldered, her muzzle silvered with age. She sat apart from the others, watchful. Savannah stopped beneath the cover of a nearby thicket. Leo looked to her, ears twitching. She did not move forward. Instead, she gave him a soft nudge, then one last low, rumbling growl, a sound more breath than voice, a farewell and a push forward. Leo hesitated. His paws stayed rooted for a moment. Then he turned, looked into her eyes, and stepped from the brush into the light. The pride lifted their heads. The 2 young males paused mid-sprint. The older lioness rose and approached slowly. Leo lowered his body in respectful submission. The lioness sniffed him, once, twice, then rubbed her head against his shoulder. Acceptance. He turned then, just once, to look back. Savannah watched from the shadows, her eyes steady and open, even as her chest ached. Leo's gaze held hers for several heartbeats. Then he gave a soft growl, not of fear, not of longing, but of promise. And then he walked into his pride. Savannah stood motionless for a long time after he vanished from view. Not until the sun had fully risen did she turn and walk back into the forest. Alone. 3 months passed. The dry season settled over the ridge, painting the landscape in gold and amber. Leaves fell in spirals from the trees. The scent of new growth had faded into the crisp tang of autumn. Life continued at the sanctuary. Rangers monitored fences. Tourists came and went from the visitor center. And Wade Benson worked longer hours but spoke more often to his son. Tyler had changed. His hair was longer now, tied back in a loose ponytail that Nina teased him about. He smiled more, though rarely. It was real. And every weekend. He hiked into the woods just beyond the burn line, binoculars slung around his neck and a sketchbook tucked into his pack. He never said what he was looking for, but his father knew. Savannah had not been seen in weeks. Then, one afternoon, as golden light spilled across the cliffs of Aspen Ridge, Tyler climbed to the high overlook near Old Pine Rock, the place where the fire had once burned the fiercest. From there, he could see the whole southern valley, the winding trail below, and the blackened stumps that had slowly begun to sprout green again. He sat down, opened his sketchbook, and began to draw. Rough outlines of a lion, a cub, a paw print, a memory. And then he heard it. A low rumble, not threatening, not loud, just enough to feel in the bones. He looked up, across the ridge, standing in the shadow of the last pine tree before the rock fell into valley. Was a lioness. Her fur was darker now, marked with age and survival. Her left leg still bore the scar from Brutus's attack, but her eyes, steady, golden, ancient, had not changed. Savannah. Tyler stood, stunned. She stared at him for a moment, then turned her head slightly. From the brush behind her, a larger figure stepped forward, Leo, no longer a cub. He had become a young male in full transition. His mane had started to grow along his neck, forming a dark halo around his face. His shoulders were broader, his stride heavier, but in his eyes, those soft amber eyes, was something unchanged. Recognition. Love. He approached Savannah first and touched his forehead to hers. Then, slowly. He turned to Tyler. He didn't come close. He didn't need to. He stood tall, at a respectful distance, and gave a short, soft growl, a promise kept. Savannah lay down beside a nearby rock, while Leo sat at her side, The two lions remained there, beneath the shadow of the pines, as the sun dipped lower, and from that day on, they came back often, not every week, not always together, but enough. Enough to remind Tyler that family isn't always made by blood, and that some goodbyes are never really final. Sometimes, they're just the start of something quieter, something that lasts. Sometimes, the most extraordinary miracles come not with thunder or lightning, but in silence, in the quiet bond between a lioness and a cub, in a boy's unspoken prayers, in a healing that cannot be explained by nature alone. Savannah did not choose Leo because of instinct. She chose him because something deeper stirred inside her, something many of us have felt when grief gives way to grace, when pain opens a door to love, and maybe, just maybe, that something was the gentle hand of God in our lives. We all carry wounds, we all lose, but sometimes, what we think is the end of the road is simply the beginning of a greater journey. Savannah found her purpose again. Leo found a family. Tyler found healing in a bond he couldn't see but could feel in his soul. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and if you believe in miracles, in love that transcends nature, in healing that comes through connection, then type Amen in the comments. May God bless you, guide you, and remind you that no matter how lost we feel, we are never truly alone.